This is what we bring to you. The House of Consciousness Information, where we document our story live on videotape, 125th Street. See? Have no respect for the black man on the 125th Street. See what I'm saying, brother? That's what we're talking about. Like, no respect for the black man. See?
Brothers and sisters. Brother, do I have your permission to speak? Yes, sir. Thank you. I'm pleased to be here tonight. I'm grateful to the Good Life. I last spoke here about last February. And I did a talk then at that time called Great African Historians. As a matter of fact, let me just mention the materials that are over here. First of all, this book, which just came out. I got copies of it yesterday. It is called Egypt, Child of Africa. Now, we spend a lot of time with Egypt, but we aren't overindulging ourselves. We have a lot of documentation for Egypt, or that's the country it's called today. It used to be known as Kemet, the Black Land. This is a tough, tough book. And it is probably the last book that Ivan will edit by himself for 3 or 4 years. The next book that will come out is a book that I'm editing. It will be a revised and expanded edition of the African presence in Asia. And let me just, since I just got it, let me just tell you what the first part of this book contains. First of all, there's a tribute to a departed scholar. That's my article, right? That's the first one. I have 5 pieces in here. And this is a tribute to Dr. Chancellor James Williams, author of Destruction of Black Civilizations. I don't know how many of you know about Dr. Williams. He was born the son of a slave. His mother was a cook, a nurse, and an evangelist. He was born in Bennettsville, South Carolina, about 1895. He moved to Washington, D.C., where he lived for about 70 years. He met William Leo Hansberry, and there's an appendix on Hansberry. We also have an article, tough piece, strong piece, new pieces here, called Nile Genesis, Continuity of Culture from the Great Lakes to the Delta. That's by Charles Finch. The Racial Identity of Ancient Egyptian Populations from an Analysis of Physical Remains. This is by a brother named Keith Crawford, who lives in the Washington, D.C. area, who has actually had an opportunity to physically examine the bones, the skeletal remains of even pre-dynastic Egyptians. The next piece, very strong piece, called Black Land of Antiquity, a brief historical outline of dynastic Kemet. That's by yours truly. That's dedicated to Dr. Ben. If I do say so myself, at the risk of sounding very subjective, it's one of the very best articles in the book. Followed by another one by yours truly, called I'm in a Very Good Mood, From the Center to the Fringe, the Persistence of Racial Myths and Physical Anthropological Theory. This deals with all the names that have been heaped on black people, names like Mediterraneans, like Hamites, like members of the brown race. These are terms that came into use particularly in the 19th century when it began to be very obvious how important Egypt actually was. It was at this time that Egypt was artificially removed from Africa and placed in that nebulous spot that we all know about called the Near East or the Middle East. Up until that point, most people had no problem with the fact that Egypt was in Africa. But after Napoleon came to Egypt with his 175 scientists and engineers, and they really began to find out what the people of Egypt had done, and this is during the height of the slave experience, you had to take Egypt out of Africa. Because it was important to convince you and me that we had only been fit to work for other people. You could not justify the enslavement of African people and at the same time point to the glories of ancient Egypt. So the ancient Egyptians became white people. They moved from black to brown to white. That deals with that. You also have a very, very important piece called The Myth of the Mediterranean Race by an African sister named Dana Reynolds Marniche. One of our greatest scholars comes next. That piece is called Bringing Ma'at, Destroying Isfet, the African and African Diasporan Presence in the Study of Ancient Kemet. That's Asa Hilliard. Followed by another sister's article called The Sixth Napatan Dynasty of Kush. This deals with civilization just to the south of Egypt. In fact, we probably should not talk about Egypt in isolation. We should probably talk most of the time about Nile Valley civilizations, because when we do that, then we don't isolate Kemet. We don't isolate Egypt from the rest of the continent. I even have problems with the title of this book, Egypt, the Child of Africa. Egypt was an intrinsic part of Africa. There's no separation. There are three other pieces in the main part. The first is called The Problem of the Bernal Davidson School. This is by a young art historian named Manu Ampim. What Manu does is rake Basil Davidson and Martin Bernal over the coals. He feels that these are two white men who have more or less gotten in on the African-centric movement, Martin Bernal in particular, and he takes them to task. He has a much more sound article that deals with modern forgeries of the Cairo Museum. Certain pieces that you see, for example, that bust of Nefertiti, a few other pieces that may look like Europeans, he calls them forgeries, and he documents those. And last but not least, in this section, there's an article called 7 times 7, the 7 Hermetic Principles of Ancient Egypt. In the other part of the book, there are book reviews. My own book is reviewed. There's an article called The Royal Ships of the Pharaohs. There's an article on the oldest preserved mummy. There's an article on the oldest known paved road on Earth. There's an article on the first human skull in existence. There are articles, there are articles, there are articles. It's a hot book. I have a few copies of them. I just got it yesterday, and I would be happy to autograph it for you. There are also a series of audio and videotapes. The videotapes include African contributions to the world, a very round approach. That is a lecture and slide presentation. It includes the Moors of Antiquity, a very comprehensive presentation on the black people who civilized Europe during the Middle Ages, who brought Europe out of their decadence for the second or third time. You also have African women in antiquity, another piece that Jamal did called The Rape of Africa, that deals with the invaders of Africa, who they are. And notice I said who they are. The Arabs, the white folks in South Africa, what they did, how they got there, what our relationship to them is, and last but not least, great African historians. And then you have a series of audio tapes. I take the time to promote that because I want you to understand that this is a collective thing. I am honored to get up here and speak before you. It is a pleasure and a privilege to talk about our glorious past. But we do not do this in isolation. It is important to understand that if this work is to continue, it must be based on all of your support. So when you buy a book, when you buy a tape, you can feel, and it is accurate to say that you are making a significant contribution. We all have a job to do. Not everybody can do everything. But collectively, we can do it all. Because that's what it's going to take. I want to help destroy the notion of this rugged individualism. That's something I have to fight within myself. That we have to subordinate our own individual needs and desires for the good of the collective. If we don't do that, we're not going to make it. And our issue of survival is very much in doubt. In fact, I would like to go beyond the question of mere survival. I want black people to prosper and grow. We have been on the verge, we have been surviving for a long time. That's not enough. You start from there, but where do we go from there? Those are the materials that are available. I encourage you to pick up one of them. It's all very solid information. The quality, technically, content-wise, is very, very good. I want to thank my friend and colleague and brother, Jamal Gorey. I want to thank all the staff at The Good Life and all the brothers and sisters for coming out tonight. I do appreciate it. Everybody with me so far? I'll be speaking tomorrow for Perspective Open Awareness in Pasadena at 2045 South Fair Oaks at about 4 o'clock. It's myself and Brother Mathu Atur, and there we'll be talking about a tribute to the ancestors. We'll be talking about those African men and women who have chronicled this history, beginning with the fiery David Walker in 1830. You know, even Frederick Douglass was something of an Egyptologist. In 1866 or 1870, something to that effect. I was just reading this yesterday. Frederick Douglass did an address before a group of folks where he affirmed that the ancient Egyptians were black people. problem is, during the 19th century, a lot of us associated Egypt with that wicked, evil Pharaoh. Okay? So we kind of disassociated Egypt, and we had an ambivalent attitude about it. But you also have black folks like Martin Delaney, you know, who named his children after African pharaohs, who was a Pan-Africanist, a captain in the Civil War, first black person to go to Harvard Medical School, a staunch Pan-Africanist and an early Egyptologist. You have Edward Wilmot Blyden, the person that popularized the expression Africa for the Africans. You have people like Rufus Lewis Perry. You have a brother named Edward Johnson, who 145 years ago in Philadelphia was doing sophisticated lectures, sophisticated lectures on the African origin of ancient Egypt. And we take that up until the 20th century with people like J.A. Rogers. We look at the historical emphasis placed by Marcus Garvey. Do you know that Marcus Garvey in 1920 went to Harvard University and lectured before a group of people called the Nile Club, N-I-L-E. Now, who in the world were the Nile Club? And what were they doing at Harvard University? And what did Marcus Garvey tell them in 1920? Now, that's deep, and it's an inspiration. And it makes you very humble because it makes you realize that what we're doing, although it's exciting, is not new. And what we're doing is carrying on a sacred mission. You understand that, don't you? That this is a sacred mission. This is not anything to take lightly. This is something that we are trying to use to rehabilitate our lives and our people. Our history is our badge of honor. And all strong people emphasize their history all the time. Weak people do not. And this is a time when we must be very strong. With AIDS, with crack, with Newt Gingrich, with Uncle Bill Clinton, and all of those folks who do not have our interests at heart, this is a time we must be very, very, very strong. We talk about that tomorrow. And then last but not least, let me also mention that on January the 8th, although it's a couple weeks away, I'll be doing a talk. Brother Red can comment on this if he likes, at Marcus Garvey School. It's actually the Church of Amun-Ra. Dr. Palmer called me this morning right after I got home and got in bed and was trying to go to sleep. Brother called me and says, brother, you need to talk about the church. There is a church. Brother Red, you want to mention it? Just briefly. There is a church at Garvey School. I believe it starts at 1 o'clock on Sunday afternoon, so you ought to go and check it out. If you want to hear Christianity slammed real hard, you will enjoy yourself. It is not dull. It deals with things from a historical analysis, and you ought to be there. I'll be giving a lecture on Africans in Asia on January the 8th at 1 o'clock. There's no admission charge. I'd like for you to come. Today, or tonight I should say, we are supposed to talk about a very serious question. I was approached by a publication called Image Magazine, a new magazine. I don't know if you've seen it or not. Just came out about 2 months ago. I think it's subtitled Empowering the Black Man. They called me out of the clear blue. Can everybody hear me so far? Yeah. Am I talking too loud? I know I'm talking fast because I'm very pumped up. Jamal, can you do anything about that? You're the man for all seasons, brother. I know you can do it.
Standing too. All right, let's see what we got. Go ahead.
How's that? Is that any better?
Yes.
Wonderful? Good. As long as you're happy. There's also some sisters standing. If we could do something about that. Even though they might have come late. They asked me to write an article of about 3,000 words, and I love to write. I love to sit in front of my computer, my word processor, in my study, like a monk in a monastery, and compose script about our people. And this subject matter was a little bit odd, though, but they wanted to pay me a decent amount of money, and it was something different. They wanted me to address the issue that all of us, I'm sure, have thought about at one time or another. Are white people inherently evil? Are white people inherently evil? That's very thought-provoking. That's very provocative. And they wanted me to base it on unfavorable white-black relationships. That was not hard for me to do, because all the historical white-black relationships that I have found have been unfavorable all the white-black relationships that I have identified have been unfavorable for black people, with no exceptions. They wanted me to write it in a personalized manner, not real academic, and they wanted me to deal with some subject matters or areas that are not normally dealt with. Most of us know about the slave experience. We know about all those black people. And notice I said black people, not slaves, because slaves were not brought from Africa. Africans were brought from Africa, and they were enslaved on the way over here. Slaves did not come from Africa. Africans came from Africa. Look at it from a different perspective. We know something about that, how we were snatched up, chained, and shackled, and marched to slave fortresses on the west coast of Africa, and in human conditions, and put on those ships and brought over here. We know about how a lot of folks jumped overboard, how sometimes a mother would throw her child overboard to the sharks so that he would not have that slave experience. We know about the colonization and the rape of Africa. We know about black populations in places like Brazil and the Caribbean, although we need to have a re-examination of those. But there are certain other areas that deal with unfavorable white-black relationships in terms of groups or collectives that we have not effectively examined, and I'm going to look at 3 of those tonight. The way we're going to do this, in the course of about an hour and a half, maybe not even that long, is I'm going to go over this paper. I'm going to summarize it, and then we're going to take a brief break. It's just as brief as possible, 5-10 minutes, and then we're going to set up a slide projector, and I'm going to illustrate the rest of this with a series of slides, and then we're going to have a summary. Is that okay?
Right on.
Very good. Are white people inherently evil? Are they, by their very nature, racist? No. At least I don't believe them to be. Now, I am not speaking for popularity, right? Because a lot of people do believe that, and there may be something to it. But what I'm going to do is present some information, and you can draw your own conclusions. I'm looking at this from the perspective of a historian. That is my discipline. As a historian, however, it is exceptionally clear to me. Yeah, it may be, man. Hey. And probably obvious to the entire world that white people generally possess an extremely brutal record vis-a-vis black people. The European role in the transatlantic slave trade and the rape and subjugation of Africa are themselves clear, damning, and execrable demonstrations of white brutality and hostility towards blacks. Obviously, though, white-black relationships have not been confined to Africa and the Western Hemisphere. We supplement our knowledge here, therefore, in this brief survey of unfavorable white-black relationships by examining 3 very important geographic regions of the world that frequently escape the attention of African Americans or Africans living in America. That is India, Australia, and Tasmania. We begin with India. Now, we now know, based on recent scientific studies of DNA, that modern humanity originated in Africa, that black people are the world's original people, and that all modern humans can ultimately trace their ancestral roots back to Africa. Everybody knows that, correct? There should be no doubt about those 3 things. Not only are black people the world's original people, however, black people created many of the world's earliest and most enduring civilizations. Such was the case in India. In ancient India, more than 1,000 years before the foundation of Greece and Rome, proud and industrious black men and women known as Dravidians erected a classic high culture. Of the Dravidians, Marco Polo, the Venetian traveler who got around, observed that, and I want you to listen to what he had to say. He said, "The darkest man is here, the most highly esteemed and considered better than the others who are not so dark." Let me add that in very truth, these people portray and depict their gods and their idols black, and their devils as white as snow. This is 800 years ago. For they say that, you like that, huh? For they say that God and all the saints are black, and the devils are all white. That is why they portray them as I have described. Now, about 3,500 years ago, classical civilization in India was disrupted by the incursion of violent, nomadic, patriarchal white tribes known as Aryans, A-R-Y-A-N-S. The Aryans were products of a place called the Eurasian steppe. This was a region characterized by a fear and hostility towards things foreign. Extreme individualism, characteristics some of us are picking up. moral and material solitude, and what could only be called a pessimistic view of life itself. The ferocity of nature in the Eurasian steppe created instincts essential for survival in such an environment. In this land, nature left no illusion of goodwill. It was merciless and allowed no negligence. And in the course of a long, painful, and bitter existence, Europeans could not afford the luxury of believing in a beneficent God that would shower down generous methods of gaining a livelihood. The harsh environment of Northern Europe in general and the Eurasian steppe in particular engendered in its people a harsh personality, a cold and cruel nature, a violent, austere, and competitive culture and mentality. It was this type of culture, this type of mentality the white people introduced into India. Now, the Aryans were not necessarily superior warriors and were not especially courageous on the battlefield, but they were aggressive, they developed sophisticated military technologies, and they glorified military virtues. After hundreds of years of conflict, the Aryans succeeded in subjugating most of northern India. And throughout the conquered territories, a rigid caste segmented, I'm going to talk about caste in some detail, a caste segmented social order was established with the masses of conquered black people who were called Sudras, essentially reduced to slaves and imposed upon for service in any capacity required by their white conquerors. This vicious New World Order, which might be called a precursor to South African apartheid, was cold-blooded. I'm talking about 4,000 years ago now, before the slave trade, was cold-bloodedly racist, with the whites on top, the so-called mixed races in the middle, and the overwhelming majority of black people on the very bottom. In fact, the Aryan term Varna, V-A-R-N-A, that is the classical division of Indian society, which is used interchangeably with caste, literally means color or complexion. That's the social order of India. It means color or complexion. Truly, India is still a racist country. White supremacist David Duke claimed, and this is a direct quote, that his 1970s visit to India was a turning point in his views on the superiority of the white race. Not Mississippi, Georgia, or Alabama, India. Caste law in India, based originally on color and race, regulated all aspects of life, including marriage, diet, education, residence, and occupation. This is not to deny that there were certain elements within the black aristocracy that managed to gain prominence in the dominant white social structure. The mass of conquered blacks, however, were regarded by the whites as untruth itself. The whites claimed to have emerged from the mouth of God. The blacks were said to have emerged from the feet of God. It was written that a black who intentionally reviles whites by criminal abuse or criminally assaults them with blows shall be deprived of the limb with which he offends. If he has criminal intercourse with a white woman, his organs shall be cut off and all his property confiscated, brothers. If the woman had a protector, the Sudra, the black person, shall be executed. If he listens intentionally to the recitation of a sacred text, his tongue shall be cut out. This is Hindu law. This is Indian law. This is white folks in India. If he commits them to memory, his body shall be cut in half. With the passage of time, this color-oriented, racially-based social order became the foundation of the religion which is practiced throughout all India. This is a religion known as Hinduism. Now, as savagely as the Sudras of India, everybody still with me? Yeah. Right. As savagely as the Sudras of India were dealt with, the greatest victims of white racism in India have been the untouchables. Indeed, probably the most substantial percentage of all the black people in Asia can be identified among India's 160 million untouchables. You've heard me talk about them before. You will hear me talk about them again because they are the largest population of black people outside of Africa, and they are the most oppressed people in the world. No question about that, and that's a lot of people. The untouchables are the long-suffering descendants of Aryan Sudra unions and native black populations who retreated into the hinterlands of India in their efforts to escape the advancing Aryan sphere of influence to which they ultimately succumbed. India's untouchables number more than the, listen to this now, India's untouchables number more than the combined populations of England, France, Belgium, and Spain put together. The existence of untouchability has been justified within the context of Hindu religious thought as the ultimate and logical extensions of karma and rebirth. Must have been something that you did in a previous lifetime. They say that's why you're born an untouchable. Hindus believe that persons are born untouchable because of the sins accumulated in previous lifetimes. Hindu texts describe these people as foul and loathsome, and any physical contact with them was considered polluting. Literally, any physical contact with them was considered an abomination to God. And there are three categories of them. The first group are simply called the untouchables themselves. Their touch is considered polluting or contaminating. Secondly, you have a group called the unapproachables. Their shadow is considered polluting. Cold, ain't it? And it varies in different parts of India how close you can get to them. Some places is 11 feet. Some places 75 feet. And then you have another group called the invisibles or unseeables. Their sight is considered polluting. And in large cities in India, until the 1920s, these people were not allowed to enter the cities within daylight hours because it was thought their shadows would cause pollution. These are black people. Untouchables were usually forced to live in pitiful little settlements on the outskirts of Hindu communities. During certain periods in Indian history, untouchables were only allowed to enter the adjoining Hindu communities at night. Indeed, the untouchable shadows were considered polluting, and they were required to beat drums and make loud noises to announce their approach. Untouchables had to attach brooms to their backs to erase any evidence of their presence. They had to attach a broom to their back so that when they walked down the street, I've seen it, so that when they walked down the street, these thorny branches would erase, any evidence that they had been there. Cuffs were tied around their necks to capture any spittle that might escape their lips and contaminate roads and streets. Their meals were taken or consumed from broken dishes. Their clothing was taken from corpses. They were forbidden to learn to read and write and were prohibited from listening to any of the traditional Hindu texts. Untouchables were denied regular access to public wells. They could not use ornaments and were not allowed to enter Hindu temples. The primary work of untouchables included scavenging and street sweeping, emptying toilets, the public execution of criminals, the disposal of dead animals and human corpses, and the cleanup of cremation grounds. The daily life of the untouchable was filled with degradation, deprivation, and humiliation. Now, the basic status of India's untouchables has changed little since ancient times, and it has recently been pointed out, quote, that caste Hindus, listen to this now, this was written in 1992. Caste Hindus do not allow untouchables to wear shoes, ride bicycles, use umbrellas, or hold their heads up while walking in the street. Untouchables in urban India are crowded together in squalid slums, while in rural India, where the vast majority of untouchables live, they are exploited as landless agricultural laborers and ruled by terror and intimidation of this. Now, as evidence of this, let me cite several cases from different parts of India. For example, these cases were taken in 1991. Could have been taken last night, today, tomorrow. For example, on June 23rd, 1991, 14 untouchables were massacred in the eastern state of Bihar. That's the state where Buddha is supposed to have received enlightenment. On August 10th, 1991, 6 untouchables were shot to death in the northern state of Uttar Pradesh. On August 16th, 1991, that's my birthday, not 1991, August 16th, an untouchable woman was stripped in public and savagely beaten in the southern state of Andhra Pradesh. I gave a lecture in Andhra Pradesh in 1987. On the 6th of September 1991, in the western state of Maharashtra, and listen to this now, an untouchable police officer was killed for entering a Hindu temple. It was raining, pouring cats and dogs, as they say. Brother sought refuge in a temple. He was beaten to death for entering the temple. Official Indian figures on violent crimes by caste Hindus against untouchables have averaged more than 10,000 cases per year, with the figures continuing to rise. The Indian government listed 14,269 cases of atrocities by caste Hindus against untouchables in 1989 alone. 15,000 cases were documented in that one year. However, Indian human rights workers report that a large number of atrocities against untouchables, including beatings, gang rapes, arson, and murders, are never